she's, more beautiful, smarter, and probably a better sense of humor.
My name is Gabriel.
Wait, you're telling me I have a budget guardian angel?
Kinda.
The internet has already decided Keanu Reeves has a wife. Search his name, and you will find headlines calling Alexandra Grant exactly that, wife, as if the word were confirmed somewhere in an official record instead of stitched together from a ring photo, a kiss on a red carpet, and a lot of wishful thinking. There's no marriage certificate. There's no wedding anyone can point to. And yet the label sticks, repeated so often that plenty of people now assume it is simply true. So here's the real question worth asking. If there was no wedding, why does the world keep insisting there was one? And what did it actually take for two of the most private people in Hollywood to let anyone see even a sliver of what is real underneath all that guessing? The answer does not start with a ring or a rumor. It starts almost 2 decades earlier, with a friendship so quiet that even people paying close attention to Keanu Reeves' life managed to miss it completely. By the time you reach the end of this, you will understand why every fresh wave of wife headlines misses the actual story, and why the truth Grant has slowly, reluctantly revealed is stranger and steadier than any wedding announcement could be. Start with the moment that keeps generating headlines. Reeves and Grant appear together at a film premiere, and photographers catch something on her hand. A ring. It is understated, nothing designed to announce itself, but cameras find it anyway. And within days entertainment sites are running stories about a secret wedding, some private ceremony tucked away from public view. Congratulations pour in across social media. Fan accounts recirculate old photos, with new captions, calling her Mrs. Reeves. A story with no actual confirmation behind it hardens into accepted fact, simply because enough people repeated it in the same breath. Grant eventually addresses it directly, and her answer is blunt. No wedding happened. It is a correction delivered without a publicist, without a formal statement. Just a woman posting honestly on her own account and asking people to actually read what she wrote instead of what they hoped was true. But corrections rarely travel as fast or as far as the rumors that came before them. Months after the truth is out there in her own words, you can still find comment sections calling her his wife. Still find lists and articles built around the version of the story that never happened. That gap between what people wanted to believe and what actually occurred tells you something important about why this couple keeps generating headlines out of almost nothing. Grant has never once used the word wife to describe herself. Reeves has never announced an engagement or a wedding date. Neither of them has offered the public a relationship status, a milestone, or a timeline. And that is precisely why one ring, photographed at exactly the wrong angle, was enough to manufacture a marriage that only ever existed in headlines. To understand how two adults can generate that much speculation while saying almost nothing, you have to go back to a version of Keanu Reeves that existed long before any of this, a version the public thought it understood completely and mostly did not. For most of his career, Reeves has functioned as one of Hollywood's genuine mysteries, which is a strange thing to say about a man this famous. He built an entire career out of instantly recognizable roles, first as the easygoing lead in a pair of goofy time travel comedies, then as the calm center of a science fiction trilogy that reshaped how action movies looked and moved, then decades later as the star of a franchise about a retired assassin that somehow made him more famous in his 50s than he had been in his 30s. Off-screen, the stories about him followed a consistent shape. The actor who quietly gives away enormous portions of his paycheck to crew members and charities. The actor spotted riding public transit like anyone else. No entourage, no fuss. Generous almost to a fault. Grounded in a way that seemed almost incompatible with the size of his fame. But the moment a reporter asked about his personal life, that openness disappeared. He would deflect, redirect the conversation, offer a short answer, and move on. For years, that was the entirety of what the public got, which meant the public simply built its own version of events. Some assumed he had given up on relationships entirely after the losses in his personal history. Some invented entire timelines of secret girlfriends based on nothing more than a photo of him standing near someone at an event. None of it was accurate, because the real answer to who Keanu Reeves loved was not hidden somewhere unreachable. It was sitting in plain sight, filed under labels nobody thought to question. Friend, collaborator, creative partner, Three ordinary words doing an enormous amount of work to keep something real out of the headlines for the better part of a decade. The actual beginning of this story is almost aggressively unglamorous. Sometime in the late 2000s, Reeves is introduced to a painter named Alexandra Grant at a dinner party, the kind of low-key gathering that nobody bothers to document because nothing about it seems significant at the time. There's no reported spark, no headline moment, just two people who get along well enough to stay in touch. That is it. That is the entire beginning. What follows is not a romance. It is a working relationship built slowly out of genuine creative overlap. A few years after that dinner, the two of them release a book together, Reeves supplying the writing, Grant supplying the artwork, something neither of them had ever done publicly with another collaborator before. According to Reeves' own later description, the book began as a private gift, something Grant put together just for him rather than for any audience, and it was only after friends saw it and pushed him to publish it properly that it became a real release. He has since described the project as something closer to a meditation on making peace with a difficult period of his life, which, in hindsight, says a great deal about what kind of partnership this was becoming even before anyone called it that. For the better part of the next decade, Reeves and Grant kept working together in ways that almost nobody outside their immediate circle noticed. They appeared at industry events together more than once, always read as two colleagues supporting each other's work rather than anything romantic. They released a second collaborative project built around Grant photography, images that focused on form and shadow rather than straightforward portraiture. They eventually co-founded a small independent publishing house together, a genuinely unglamorous business venture built on nothing that screamed romance to anyone watching from the outside. Every public appearance during those years reads, in retrospect, as two artists quietly supporting each other's careers in a corner of the culture that entertainment reporters rarely bother to check. That gap between what was actually happening between them and what anyone assumed from the outside is exactly how two intensely private people built something real for the better part of a decade without a single major outlet catching on. They were hiding, essentially, in the one place nobody thought to look closely, the art world. That changed abruptly in 2019. Over the course of several months that year, Reeves and Grant began appearing together at events in a way that no longer read as strictly professional. A benefit gala in the spring, a fashion event in Malibu where they were photographed holding hands for the first time, and finally, in the fall, a major art and film gala where the two of them walked a red carpet together in a way that made the nature of their relationship unmistakable. The story broke almost overnight, spreading across entertainment outlets, morning shows, and social media within a single news cycle. People close to Reeves later suggested he had genuinely wanted to begin sharing this part of his life publicly, that he felt ready for it. Grant's reaction, by her own later account, was closer to shock at the sheer scale of the attention. She has described feeling like nearly everyone she had ever met reached out within the first week after the story broke. But rather than leaning into the spotlight or using the moment to build a public narrative, she has said her instinct was to keep asking herself a single question. What good could actually come from all this attention? That question, more than the fame itself, appears to have shaped how both of them handled everything that came afterward. It is worth sitting with that phrasing for a moment, because it tells you something real about who she is. Not what attention could do for her, but what good it could actually produce for anyone. One detail from that period rarely gets enough attention. When the story broke in 2019, reporters scrambling to figure out how long the relationship had actually been going on got an answer from a friend of Grant's that complicated the entire timeline. The friend indicated the relationship had already been going on for several years, not months, which means the popular version of events, where Reeves and Grant supposedly became a couple sometime around 2019, does not really hold up. By the time the public found out, they were already deep into something established, something that had quietly survived years of public appearances disguised as professional obligations. It also means that every earlier photo of the two of them together at galleries and industry events, the ones everyone assumed were simply two colleagues, deserves a second look. They may not have been hiding a new relationship at all. They may have been hiding an old one that had already had years to become exactly what it was. To understand why the public reacted so strongly to that reveal, you have to understand what came before it in Reeves' life. Long before Grant, Reeves lost a close friend, actor River Phoenix, in the 1990s, a loss he has rarely discussed publicly in any detail since. Not long after that, he was in a relationship with a woman named Jennifer Syme, and the couple experienced the loss of a daughter before she was born. That relationship did not survive the aftermath, and several years later Syme herself died in a car accident. For a long stretch of his public life, nearly every profile written about Reeves circled back to this period, framing him as a man who had essentially accepted solitude rather than risk that kind of loss again. What almost nobody realized at the time is that his friendship with Grant was already quietly taking shape underneath all of that narrative, developing through shared creative projects and a small publishing venture years before the public had any reason to connect the two of them romantically at all. So when the relationship became public in 2019, it did not read like a typical celebrity announcement. It read more like the ending of a story the public had been telling about him for years, the tragic, permanently unavailable actor. Except it was not really an ending. It was something that had been happening the entire time, tucked away in plain sight, while the narrative around him assumed the opposite. It is worth being direct about something here. Alexandra Grant is not simply the woman who is sometimes credited, inaccurately, with changing Keanu Reeves' life. She had an entire career of her own, well before any of this became public. She was born in the early 1970s to parents whose work took the family to Mexico City and Paris during parts of her childhood, alongside time spent in boarding schools in the United States, which left her fluent in multiple languages long before she ever picked up a paintbrush professionally. She studied history and studio art at a well-regarded liberal arts college, then went on to earn a graduate degree in painting. Her first solo museum show took place years before Reeves entered the picture in any public capacity at all. She has run charitable art initiatives using her own work to fund other artists, taught at multiple institutions, directed a documentary, and received recognition for her own creative output, entirely independent of her personal life. When she discusses the relationship publicly, which is rare, she tends to make one point clear. She built her name first. That is not a minor detail. It is the reason she can appear on a red carpet next to one of the most recognizable actors alive, without disappearing into his shadow. Ask around the Los Angeles art world who Alexandra Grant is, and his name is rarely the first thing anyone mentions. After that initial wave of attention in 2019, the two of them largely retreated from public view together. For roughly 3 years, there were no major joint red carpet appearances, only the occasional paparazzi photograph, and nothing official from either of them. It would have been reasonable to expect them to lean into the newfound attention. Instead, they did the opposite, stepping back almost entirely. Then, a few years later, they resurfaced together at a major arts gala, and observers immediately noted how comfortable and unguarded the two of them appeared together. The following year, they went a step further, sharing an actual kiss on a red carpet in front of photographers, something neither of them had done publicly before that point. Around that same period, Reeves was asked in an interview about his most recent moment of genuine happiness, and his answer was strikingly ordinary on purpose. He described simply lying in bed with Grant, laughing about nothing in particular. No event, no cameras, no occasion. Just two people, comfortable with each other. Later that same year, Grant spoke at an event honoring her own artistic work and mentioned that falling in love as an adult, after she had already built her career on her own terms, gave her a kind of confidence she does not believe she would have developed otherwise. These small, widely spaced glimpses are essentially the only real windows the public has ever gotten into what this relationship actually looks like day to day. Blink and you miss them, which appears to be exactly the point. This is where the story circles back to that ring, and to the wedding that never happened. For weeks after photographers caught the ring at a film premiere, the rumor kept building on itself, fed by nothing more than a single photo and an enormous amount of public guessing. Eventually, Grant addressed it herself, posting on her own account rather than routing the correction through a publicist or a formal statement. She confirmed the photo people were reacting to was real, taken during an ordinary, unplanned moment rather than at any kind of engagement or wedding event, and stated plainly that the wedding people believed had happened simply did not happen. She thanked people for their good intentions, while gently pointing out how quickly false stories spread online, adding what amounted to a small, honest description of her actual life, calling it In her own words, a real and ordinary kind of happiness, rather than the manufactured version the headlines had built. Within hours, many of the same outlets that had spread the original wedding story were quoting her correction. One direct, personal post undid months of headlines built by publications with far larger platforms than her own. That is arguably the most revealing thing she has ever shared publicly. Not a secret detail about the relationship itself, but proof of how much control she is willing to take back over her own narrative when the story gets far enough from the truth. No lawyer, no press release, just a woman deciding to say what actually happened in her own words. A few weeks before that correction, Grant had already given the public something rarer than a fact check, a genuinely warm, unguarded glimpse of the relationship that nobody forced out of her. She shared a birthday post for Reeves featuring a homemade cake, speaking to him directly in the caption with an easy, playful tone, and thanking him for his partnership in a handful of plain, unremarkable words. It is easy to scroll past, but it stands out precisely because almost nothing else in this relationship's public record looks like that. Warm, playful, and offered without any rumor forcing the moment into existence. Later, at another public appearance, a reporter finally asked Reeves directly about the marriage rumors. He reportedly laughed the question off, noting it was not even the first time people had assumed the two of them had gotten married, and pointed out that they had simply been together for a long time now, said almost casually, as if it were not a particularly dramatic thing to admit. He then gave Grant credit for how she handled the misunderstanding, correcting the record without turning it into a spectacle, and even described the whole episode as strangely nice in its own way, since it came from people who genuinely wanted good things for both of them. Not annoyed, not defensive, just quietly amused that so many people cared enough to guess. Here is the piece that explains almost everything else about this relationship's coverage. Because Reeves and Grant give the public so little to work with, people end up reading meaning into almost everything. A ring photographed at one angle becomes a secret engagement. Matching outfits at an event become a coordinated announcement. The placement of a hand at a gala gets picked apart like evidence, as though enough analysis could force two intensely private people to confirm something they have shown zero interest in confirming. Even Grant's occasional captions, a handful of plain, ordinary words next to a photo, get treated like coded messages rather than what they almost certainly are, a private person sharing a small, genuine moment. Consider how unusual that actually is. Two people who rarely comment publicly on their own relationship have somehow become one of the most discussed couples in the entertainment industry, largely because of how little they choose to say. This is not a new phenomenon, and it is the same pattern that turned one ordinary ring photo into a fabricated wedding within weeks. The less two people offer the public, the more the public invents to fill that space. Few couples in Hollywood illustrate that dynamic more clearly than these two, and neither of them seems especially bothered by it. No matter how many rings, kisses, or captions end up under a microscope next, there's no title, no wedding, and no formal engagement, despite years of headlines insisting otherwise. Reeves and Grant do not appear bothered by any of it. Since going public in 2019, they have continued showing up for each other at the same handful of arts and film events, one appearance at a time, each one treated less like a grand statement and more like an ordinary night out between two people who happen to be famous. More recently, Grant has publicly celebrated milestones in Reeves' career, including a stage run he took on later in his career, sharing a moment from the audience with visible pride rather than staying silent about it. The two have also continued appearing together at film premieres, typically dressed in the same understated, muted tones they favor whenever cameras are present, offering just enough for photographers without inviting further speculation. Their publishing house, meanwhile, is still active years after they first founded it together, and Grant has continued expanding her own creative and business pursuits well beyond it. Proof that whatever this relationship is actually built on, it has never required her to shrink her own life around his. What began as two guarded people quietly making books together in the background has become one of the longest-running, least explained relationships in the entertainment industry. A relationship that keeps generating headlines for one consistent reason. The two people at the center of it simply refuse to explain themselves on anyone else's schedule. They correct the record only when the gap between rumor and reality gets too wide to ignore, then go straight back to living quietly until the next photo, the next ring, or the next wave of speculation pulls them back into the conversation. And every single time, millions of people watch it happen anyway, still convinced that somewhere behind the silence is a wedding, a title, a confirmation they are simply owed. Maybe that is the actual reveal here. Not a secret wedding, not a hidden title, but the fact that two people this famous have managed to build something real without ever needing the public's permission to call it whatever they want. So the real question worth asking is not whether Keanu Reeves has a wife. It is whether either of them actually needs that word at all, or whether they have already built something sturdier than a title, one quiet, undocumented year at a time. Step back from the ring, the kiss, and the birthday cake for a moment, and a larger pattern starts to emerge, one that applies to almost everything Reeves has ever done in public. Long before Alexandra Grant, he was already known as someone who treated privacy less like a strategy and more like a basic requirement for living something close to a normal life. Cast members from his biggest franchises have described him showing up to set early, staying late to work with crew members on lighting and stunt choreography rather than retreating to a trailer, and quietly covering costs for people around him without ever mentioning it publicly himself. Those stories tend to surface years later, told by someone else, never by him. That same instinct, letting actions speak instead of statements, appears to carry directly into how he has handled his relationship with Grant. He does not appear to see silence as evasive. He seems to treat it as simply consistent with how he has always operated, on set and off. Grant's own approach reinforces the same pattern from a different direction. Long before she was linked to one of the most famous actors alive, she had already built a reputation in the Los Angeles art world for letting her work do the talking rather than courting attention around her personal life. Colleagues and critics who reviewed her early gallery shows tended to focus entirely on the material itself, line form, the relationship between text and image in her paintings, with almost nothing written about who she was dating or why. That same instinct for keeping her personal life separate from her public output did not disappear once she became publicly linked to Reeves. If anything, it explains why, even now, her rare public statements about the relationship tend to be short, specific, and quickly followed by a return to whatever project she happens to be working on. Put those two instincts together, a man who has spent decades treating personal disclosure as unnecessary, and a woman who built her entire career on letting art speak instead of biography, and the silence around this relationship stops looking mysterious. It starts looking almost inevitable. Two people who already knew, long before they ever met each other, that they did not need public validation to know something in their own lives was real. That is arguably the most private detail either of them has ever revealed, not through a statement, but simply by how consistently they have both behaved for decades, together and separately, long before anyone thought to ask. It also explains why every attempt by outside observers to define the relationship on the public's terms, a wedding, a title, an anniversary date, keeps failing. Reeves and Grant were never operating according to a script anyone else could read. They were building something on a timeline nobody outside their circle had access to, using their work as cover not because they were ashamed of each other, but because neither of them saw any reason the rest of the world needed a play-by-play of something so ordinary to them. In a city built on constant self-disclosure, that alone might be the most radical thing about them. If you found this look behind the headlines worth your time, consider liking this video and subscribing for more deep dives into the real stories behind Hollywood's most private relationships, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Thanks for watching.